I'm not one of those girls who uses dating apps, but loneliness has a way of creeping in, especially on days like Valentine's Day. Living alone in a city where no one asks how you're doing can be heartbreaking. So a few days ago, I got carried away and downloaded Tinder. I wasn't expecting anything, maybe an exchange of messages that would bore me or some creepy guy sending inappropriate pictures. But then Eric showed up. His profile wasn't flashy, which made it better. Normal photos, walks outdoors, one of him holding a cup of coffee, and a smile that didn't look fabricated. His bio was simple: lover of books, good coffee, and long talks. He didn't seem like the type to bombard you with emojis or awkward compliments. I swiped right, and to my surprise, we matched instantly. We started talking, and against all odds, the conversation flowed. We discussed books, movies, and music. It didn't take long for us to decide to meet. Eric suggested our first date be on February 14th. It seemed a little cheesy. I didn't even know the guy, but it was a nice change from a day I usually spent ignoring the calendar. We agreed to meet at a quiet bar downtown. Eric even insisted on picking me up, which I found charming. If only I had known what was going to happen, I would never have left my apartment. Eric arrived punctually, a detail that was rare in my previous experiences. He wore a black jacket and dark jeans, casual but dressed up. He wasn't a movie heartthrob, but his smile was disarming, and there was something in his eyes that made me feel watched. On the way to the bar, we talked about unimportant things: traffic, the weather, and the Valentine's Day decorations flooding the city. He told me he didn't usually use Tinder and that I was his first match in months. Something in his tone made me feel like that wasn't entirely true, but I let it slide. After all, who doesn't embellish things a bit on a first date? The bar was cozy and almost empty. We ordered beers and sat in a corner. At first, everything seemed normal. Eric was funny and attentive, though every now and then he would look away as if something else was capturing his attention. He talked about his work as a graphic designer, his personal projects, and how he had grown up in a small, lonely town. As the evening progressed, however, I began to notice something strange. Eric had a peculiar way of answering my questions, as if he didn't always remember what he had just talked about. Sometimes his tone would change abruptly, and for a moment he seemed like someone else. At one point, he even referred to himself in the third person. "Eric's always been a good boy," he said, and then laughed as if he had told an inside joke. I didn't want to think too much about it. Maybe it was nervousness or something, unimportant. But when we left the bar and he offered to drive me home, that uncomfortable feeling didn't go away. Instead of taking the road that led directly to my apartment, Eric turned onto a street I didn't recognize. "Is this the quickest way?" I asked. "Yes, it's a shortcut. Don't worry about it," he replied. The street was almost deserted and barely lit. I looked out the window trying to get my bearings, but the scenery was unfamiliar. "Where are we?" I asked, my heart beginning to beat faster. "Just a second. I want to show you something," Eric said. I tried to hide my growing anxiety, but when I saw that we were turning onto a dead-end road, my body tensed. The place was surrounded by trees, and beyond was only darkness. "Eric, I want to go home now," I said firmly. He turned to me with an expression I hadn't seen before, a mixture of amusement and something else. "Are you getting scared? Relax. We're not going to hurt you," he said. "What do you mean by we?" "Eric, what's going on? Just let me out. I'm begging you," I pleaded. "You should stop talking and start enjoying the ride. It will be worth it," he replied, his tone becoming less convincing. Without thinking twice, I tried to open the door, but it was locked. "We just want to talk. Why do you keep making a scene?" he said, his voice growing colder. That's when I saw something in the back seat, a pair of latex gloves and a rope. "Oh my God, what is that? Let me out!" I screamed, hitting the door as hard as I could, but it was no use. The car was locked, and there was no one outside. Eric leaned toward me and in one swift motion grabbed my wrist. His strength was surprising. "Don't make this harder than it has to be," he said. I struggled, kicking and screaming, but the car was completely locked and his grip wouldn't budge. Suddenly, his expression softened, as if something inside him had clicked. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry," he said, letting go of my hand. His gaze seemed lost, as if he didn't understand what he was doing. "I don't know what's wrong with me. Sometimes I feel like it's not me. It's him, isn't it? Did you meet him? I'm sorry. I didn't want him to come out," he said, his voice trembling. Before I could say anything else, his face changed again. "Eric, please, I don't know what's going on, but you must open this door," I begged. "Not happening, darling. Eric is not here now. It's just the two of us," he said, his voice cold and menacing. Without thinking twice, I lunged at him with all my might, trying to hit his face. I took him by surprise and, for an instant, managed to disorient him. I reached for the door lock, unlocked it, and jumped out of the car, running into the darkness. My feet barely touched the ground as I ran. Behind me, I heard the driver's door open and Eric's footsteps following me. "Come here!" he shouted. I kept running, my legs burning. But I didn't stop. I found a small, abandoned shed and hid inside, trying to control my breathing. From my hiding place, I heard him approaching, his footsteps crunching on the wet ground. "Do you think you can hide? Do you think I won't find you?" he said, his voice eerily calm. When he opened the shed door, I waited for him with a piece of wood I had found on the ground. I tried to hit him, but he stopped my hand easily and began to laugh. "End of the way, darling," he said, his face twisted with malice. I knew that if he attacked me, I would have no escape. But just as he was about to strike, his face changed again. "Where am I? Oh my God, did I hurt you? You must run, run away. He will come back," he said, his voice filled with panic. I took advantage of his distraction and hit him with the wood. This time, he couldn't stop the blow. I saw an opportunity to run away again, this time toward the road. A few minutes later, a car appeared on the horizon. I waved my arms frantically, and the driver slammed on the brakes. "Help me, please," I screamed. Without hesitation, the man let me in and accelerated away. I looked back and saw Eric in the distance, standing in the middle of the road, looking at me with an expression I can never forget. The police arrested him the next day. But the most disturbing thing was what they found in his house. Hidden cameras, videos of other women, and a list of names, including mine. I never used dating apps again. Eric was convicted, but he didn't go to prison. He was sent to a mental institution after being diagnosed with psychopathy, antisocial personality disorder, and dissociative identity disorder. Whatever he has, he is not and will never be the victim. The victims were all the women on that list, and I almost became one of them. Alan's story. My name is Alan. I'm 40 years old, living in Northern California now, but the story I'm about to tell you began on Halloween night in 1999. I was 16, living in Michigan and experimenting with witchcraft. Back then, I didn't understand what I was getting into. I'd abandoned my Baptist upbringing and was looking for something to fill that spiritual void. Witchcraft felt powerful. It started innocently enough. My brother Alex and I bought a Parker Brothers Ouija board at the mall. It was meant to be a joke for a Halloween party he was hosting at his house. His wife, Anita, their 3-year-old, and daughter Susan, and I were there when the guests began asking questions about my craft. I showed off some tarot readings and they were impressed. Then someone asked if I'd ever tried a Ouija board. I hadn't, but I was intrigued. Alex was curious too, so we dimmed the lights, gathered in the living room, and placed our fingers on the planchette. At first, nothing happened. We laughed it off, but then the planchette moved. It spelled out 2 chilling words: "Get out." Everyone scattered after that, convinced we'd conjured something. Alex insisted he hadn't moved the planchette, and I knew I didn't either. Still, I brushed it off. It was just a game, or so I thought. After the party, I stayed up to help Anita clean. Alex had gone to bed, and I offered to take the trash out to the garage, a detached structure at the side of the yard. The moment I stepped inside, I felt it, a suffocating presence, as though I was being watched. I tried to ignore it, but when I turned to leave, I saw it. Standing in the shadows of the garage was a pale, faceless figure. Its hands were bony, like claws, reaching out for me. I froze for a second, then slammed the door shut and ran back inside, shaking. I woke Alex up and begged him to check the garage with me. He grabbed his pistol and we went out together, but the figure was gone. Alex believed me. He remembered how I'd predicted Dad's work accident in a dream, but we chalked this up to stress or my imagination. I wanted to believe that too. The alternative was too much to handle. I brought the Ouija board home with me, still not fully convinced it was dangerous. That's when things started going downhill. At night, I heard whispers in my room. My mom began waking up with strange bite marks on her arms, and Dad's paralyzed leg, injured from the accident I'd foreseen, still ached. I refused to make the connection until the truth hit me during a solo session with the Ouija board. I lit a candle on my dresser, asking questions to an empty room. Suddenly, the flame shot up, nearly reaching the ceiling. A low, guttural growl filled the room. That was the last straw. I called Alex and begged him to help me get rid of it. We tore the board in half and buried it in the woods behind my house. I thought that was the end of it. It wasn't. A few days later, my friend Tim called. He'd seen us bury the board and, out of curiosity, dug it up with another friend. He said it was perfectly intact, despite me ripping it into pieces. "Why did you bury a perfectly good Ouija board?" he asked. "It's cursed. Get rid of it," I warned, but Tim didn't listen. He and his friend played with it, and the friend took it home. A month later, that friend's mother died in a freak accident, falling down a flight of stairs. Not long after, the friend took his own life. I knew deep down that the board was responsible. Back at home, the disturbances escalated. The whispers turned into growls. My mom and dad kept waking up with fresh marks. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. Every night, I felt like I was being watched. One night, I woke up to see the pale, faceless figure standing at the foot of my bed. It didn't move. It didn't speak. It just stood there, watching. I stopped practicing witchcraft after that, but the damage was already done. Years passed. My parents divorced, and I moved to Mississippi with my mom. In 2011, I relocated to California, thinking I'd left everything behind. But in the summer of 2013, I returned to Michigan to visit my family. My father was dying, and I wanted to be there for him. That's when the nightmare started. Every night, I dreamed of a shadowy figure with burning red eyes. It would chase me, its hatred tangible. I woke up drenched in sweat, my heart pounding. When my father passed, the dreams got worse. I told Alex, and he introduced me to a retired pastor who lived in his trailer park. That night, I went to Alex's trailer to meet him. The moment I stepped inside, everything went black. When I came to, I was strapped to a chair with Alex and another man pinning me down. The pastor stood in front of me, holding a Bible and praying. Alex explained that I'd been possessed. My eyes had turned black, and I'd attacked the pastor. It took both of them to hold me down. I had no memory of any of it. The pastor performed a deliverance prayer, and when it was over, Alex handed me a rosary. "Keep this with you. You'll need it," he said. After that night, things shifted. I started attending Mass regularly. The nightmares stopped, but whatever had possessed me didn't disappear. It found a new target, Alex. He began drinking heavily and using drugs. His marriage fell apart. I moved back to California, hoping he'd find his way. Last year, I got a call from Anita. She was panicked, saying Alex had attacked her and the kids. She described his eyes as pitch black, just like mine had been. When I prayed with her over the phone, Alex screamed and thrashed in the background. As she recited the St. Michael prayer in Latin, he began shouting back in perfect Latin. Alex didn't know Latin. He barely passed English in school. The police arrived and restrained him. Paul, his youngest son, had called them after Alex hit him with a guitar. Alex passed out in the backyard as the officers arrived. They took him to the hospital, then to jail. He's been in prison ever since. In prison, Alex's behavior was erratic. Guards reported him speaking in languages he didn't know and exhibiting superhuman strength during outbursts. A priest finally agreed to perform an exorcism. It wasn't an easy process. Anita and the kids stayed in touch with him, visiting when they could. During one visit, Alex broke down in tears. He told them he felt the presence leave him during the exorcism. For the first time in years, he felt like himself again. I sent him a rosary with St. Michael's image engraved on it. He wears it every day now, but the damage was done. He's still in prison, serving time for what the demon made him do. These days, I'm on a different path. I'm joining the Catholic Church and considering the priesthood. My faith is the only thing that keeps me grounded. I pray for Alex every day and for anyone else who might be dealing with what we went through. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this: stay away from witchcraft. Stay away from Ouija boards. You don't know what you're inviting into your life, and once it's in, it's nearly impossible to get rid of. The lifeguard. It all started as an ordinary summer, the kind where the heat drives every parent to search for ways to keep their kids entertained. I'd been bringing my 2 boys to the community center for a year, mostly for the gym and occasional swimming. One day, I noticed something I hadn't seen before: an indoor water park tucked at the back of the facility. 2 massive pools, water slides and fountains, all under a high glass ceiling that glinted with sunlight. My kids were instantly hooked, and soon our summer break revolved around this place. The setup was perfect. I would sit in the shaded seating area near the corner, usually with a book, while the boys splashed and screamed their way through the day. Most parents kept to themselves, occasionally nodding in acknowledgement. The lifeguards patrolled the area, some more engaged than others. But it was clear this wasn't anyone's first job. It felt safe, predictable, even relaxing. About a week into our regular visits, I started noticing her. One of the lifeguards, a young woman with sharp features and deep-set eyes. She kept staring at me, not just glances, but full-on, unwavering stares. The first time it happened, I brushed it off. Maybe she was zoning out, or maybe I just happened to be in her line of sight. But it didn't stop. Every day, she would sit at her station, eyes locked on me. It didn't matter if I looked back. She didn't even flinch. It was unnerving, but I told myself not to overthink it. She probably wasn't staring at me intentionally. Then one afternoon, she approached. Her voice was cold, almost robotic. "Could you move? I need that fan to face me," she said. I blinked, caught off guard. There were other parents sitting near the same fan, but she was staring directly at me. Sure," I said. A nearby lifeguard, a man with a friendly demeanor, noticed and helped me find another spot. As I settled in, I couldn't help but notice the 2 lifeguards arguing in hushed tones, occasionally glancing in my direction. When it was time to leave, she was there again. I turned to grab my bag and found her standing behind me, glaring. "Are you leaving?" she asked. I nodded, feeling the weight of her gaze even as I walked away. The air around her felt suffocating, like she was holding back something dark. The next day, I considered not going back. I know it wasn't a big deal, but I didn't feel comfortable. But my kids begged me. They loved the water park, and I didn't want to disappoint them over something that might just